Hello everyone, today we'll be talking about J. Heinrich's Thank You for Arguing, Chapter 11, Gain the High Ground, in a presentation put together by me. We've already been studying his book, in which students have been able to use a variety of rhetorical tactics to form and win an effective argument or counter-argument. In our study of Chapter 11, Gain the High Ground, students will be able to use advantageous and commonplace rhetoric to maintain control of an argument, as well as methods to identify and employ commonplaces held by the audience in the argument. While watching this video, please complete the handout as it progresses. If the lesson is moving too fast for you, just pause the video and catch up. Think about the lesson that you just learned after it's completed and complete the Path to Ascension, or quest, to expand on the material. And remember, you'll use this information for future learning, so review it after we're done. A common mistake made in rhetoric is turning the argument about them and using examples that redirect back to the speaker. This can be detrimental to the argument and downright fatal. The audience's support should always be your goal, but it's not easy. To win, you often have to give them what they want and prove to them that your choice is the best. We do this using a tactic called the advantageous, which is a form of persuasion that deals with choices in the future. The goal is to make the audience believe that your own choice is the most to their advantage. For example, while making a toddler eat oatmeal, she does think her brother should be taken down a peg. You can convince the toddler to eat her oatmeal by telling her to eat half of her oatmeal, and then she can lob the bowl at her brother's head and get the rest all over him. While this is morally dubious and even personally objectionable depending on who you ask, it accomplishes the mission of the argument. Aristotle himself once said, "The person who is most affected by a decision makes the best judge of it." The person most affected by a decision makes the best judge of it. Back in the toddler example, parents base their arguments back on what they want, which is strong bones and healthy bodies. But the toddler doesn't really want either of those. After all, it's not worth choking down the gross stuff just for a healthy body. So you have to strike common ground with your audience using logos. In this case, you have to provide the toddler with something she understands and she can relate to, which you have to know her for. You have to know the audience's views and base your argument on their common sense and start from their position. To do this, you need the commonplace, which is any cliche, belief, or value that can serve as the audience's boiled down public opinion. It's generally the starting point of the argument and the ground that the audience currently stands on. A commonplace is sometimes seen as a cliche, but is a short form of expression of common sense or public opinion that can sometimes be overplayed. For example, all men are created equal, or it's more practical to buy in bulk, are commonplaces. While they're not always correct, they serve as a rule of thumb for a particular group's way of thinking. It functions as that group's thoughts and helps group members identify with the group. They take advantage of the way humans process information. For example, when we see our friend Jeff walking down the road, we don't have to examine his eyes, mouth, hair, and his nose, or anything else about him. We just see our friend Jeff and move on. And commonplaces work in the same way. Concepts behind cliches also represent commonplaces. They're generally overplayed prevailing wisdom. We all know that the only bird that catches the worm means people who got out of bed earlier than the average Joe tend to have more success in life and all that jazz. And it's okay that we already know that, because it's a simple truth our country was built on. You can identify commonplaces visually by looking at how the character is put together. Generally, you can do this without any unnecessary dialogue or explication. For example, a 2-day beard and a glass of whiskey denote an alcoholic, or a stone-cold hero in a beating, but that turns soft for a woman's touch, is very characteristic of our movie protagonists. Sometimes we see it as lazy, but it does help establish things quickly. We can identify commonplaces verbally using a number of processes. Usually, the audiences tend to fall back on their commonplaces as a reflex or defense. Using babbling, the audience repeats the same thing over and over, and if they do so, they're probably mouthing a commonplace. Likewise, they probably use a commonplace in the rhetoric of their rejection. If you can find the commonplace, it can be used against them when the argument resumes. They are heard frequently throughout a conversation, as like cliches, which are just as important as underplayed commonplaces. You can identify your commonplaces based on how someone talks normally. For example, if you talk to a woman and she refers to a journey, she probably sees life and events as opportunities for adventure and growth. If she talks about kids these days, you're probably better off not telling her about your favorite rap artist. And if she talks about something not being PC, she probably isn't caring much about cultural nuance or offending others with her statements. With commonplaces does come trouble. For example, its evil twin, the stereotype, which are opinions applied to groups outside of context, which can be irrelevant and even damaging to an argument. For example, talking about that left-wing Democrat versus that loud girl in our math class, or talking about these three black guys at the party last night versus these three French women at the same party. But they're not always harsh or cruel. Talking about that geek versus that kid in our chemistry class doesn't put a negative image in your head for the sake of violence or unpleasantness. Referring to a geek just may mean he's a social outcast of some sort. Stereotypes aren't always fatal to the argument, but they are detrimental in most cases. You should always watch out for the commonplace label, which is a commonplace applied to an idea, proposal, or piece of legislation for the purpose of making anyone who opposes it risk seeming like an outsider. The George W. Bush administration was a master of this, and they applied a commonplace label to a number of policies and legislation they published. For example, the No Child Left Behind Act, the Clear Skies Act, and the Culture of Life Act all use commonplace labels. Now, it's important to remember that commonplace labels work because they apply to commonplaces held by the current audience. The Spartans would really object to the No Child Left Behind due to their practice of infanticide, and the British would have protested Iraqi freedom at the empire's height because Iraq was still part of that empire. And the French would probably wonder what we were protecting marriage against. But we know what applies behind these things, which makes them effective. However, commonplace labels are not invincible. All you need to do is counter them with equally powerful rhetoric. For example, match culture of life with culture of freedom, or the Patriot Act versus the Courage Act. In context, commonplaces can be rather effective. For example, in the popular play The Music Man, parents are concerned about their wayward youth after they leave town. Professor Harold Hill seizes the opportunity by referring to kids these days. He convinces the town to buy instruments and band uniforms from him to give them a new opportunity. Hill uses a commonplace of the community to create an advantageous argument, which he inevitably wins. Key terms, in case anyone missed them, are the advantageous, which essentially is a form of persuasion that helps you build an argument that makes the audience believe your own choice is the most to their advantage. The commonplace, which is any cliche, belief, or value that serves as the audience's which serves as the ground the audience currently stands on, or the starting point of your argument. Babbling and rejection are two methods used to identify commonplaces in conversation, which, respectively, mean repeating the same thing over and over again, or using a commonplace in the rejection, which can be used against them when the argument resumes. Also, watch out for commonplace labels, which are ideas, proposals, or legislation that make it seem like anyone who opposes it is an outsider. Remember, in order to gain the high ground, you have to begin your argument by taking small steps from the audience's commonplace and offer a path that is perceived to be the audience's advantage in order to maintain control. Other steps you can take to stay on top are to watch for verbal and visual clues to commonplaces, which can often be found in either the appearance or defense of the audience, and to know how to interpret commonplace labels. If the name of something sounds hard to disagree with, it can generally be countered with something just as strong. Some points of reflection. Heinrich notes that almost no one says, do what you want to do anymore. Instead, people tend to say it's about values, which seems to return to the outlook of our country's Puritan founders. Why do few commonplaces always apply, and why do the commonplaces of culture seem to cycle over time? Statecraft, which is a rather selfish art, although many debates divide between morals and the advantageous usually wins in the long run. For instance, if you believe in military action to depose violent dictators, you're more likely to win your point if you spend more time showing how your country would benefit. If the advantageous argument trumps morals and statecraft, why should we even bother arguing with morals in the first place? That's all I have for today, and thank you for learning.